Good afternoon again, everybody. If you just joined us, um, thank you for joining us this afternoon. There are a few people still coming in. I'm very glad to welcome you today, and a special welcome to Pascal Geenens from Firma Radware. We as NaWas are working closely with Radware technologists and are impressed about the evolution of technology on their side. Thank you very much for being willing to share your knowledge with us this afternoon. Pascal is well known for his broad field of expertise on cybersecurity, and especially the subject which brought us here this afternoon, which is DDoS attacks. This is still very much a hot items these days. So we're looking forward to you, Pascal, to see what you can share with us today. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Octavia. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And as Octavia said, I'm going to focus network and application threat landscape, but specifically for DDoS. So we're going to go through different aspects of DDoS. And my task is especially to explain you who's behind DDoS attacks, why would they perform DDoS attacks, what are the tools, what are the major attacks that we're seeing. So, but first, before we start talking about who's going to perform DDoS, and this is based on a survey that we did with uh, C-level people, and we asked them, what do you think is the objective, and what is the most impactful in cyber attacks for your business? And for most of them, yeah, without actually being a surprise, came out that service disruption and data theft are the two most important ones, and those lead to financial gain for the motive of the attacker, and of course reputation loss and financial loss and customer churn on the side of the victim that was impacted. So DDoS is one of those tools that can make service disruption in your network. It's not the only one. I'm sure that everybody knows about ransomware. Ransomware is there everywhere, but there's a big difference between DDoS attacks and ransomware. And although we have ransom DDoS, and I might sometimes confuse ransom DDoS with ransomware, and I hear that that's why mostly talk about DDoS extortion and not about ransom DDoS, but they're basically, they sound like the same. The end goal is the same for the attacker, but the method of operation is completely different. If you look at the ransomware, somebody needs to get into your network, they need to have an intrusion, they need to leave some software behind, they need to have a communication with their servers to extract the information if they want to use it to leverage again for extortion. With DDoS, it's more like a hit and run. With DDoS, they use external devices that are not theirs, or they spoof IP addresses, and they just hit you with a big flow of data, and you have no way of tracking back who they are. There's no direct connection between the packets arriving at your network and the actual attacker performing the attack. So it's a much easier, much more disconnected, and less riskier to get caught to do DDoS attacks. And that's why it happens way more than we see ransomware. Although ransomware comes more in the press because, yeah, the people that get impacted and the impact of it is much bigger and much larger. So before I go into detail on some of the attacks, firstly, the actors and their motives. So there's different kind of people that might, and depending on which vertical you're in and what industry you're working with your business, you will come in touch with different kinds of people and different motivations for attacking you. So the first one is the organized crime, and those are the people who live on the underground. They are segmented in different groups. You have people who are doing R&D and building tools, building platforms. They build, for example, DDoS platforms that are then used by other people to perform the attacks, and then you have people who are there to extract the money and launder the money. So everybody has pretty much their own task, and they work together, and they are very well organized, and it's all mostly driven by money, if not all. So stealing, laundering, illegal trading, extortion, that's part of their game. And then you have the angry people, so, and those are driven by revenge, and that can be an employee, a disgruntled employee, or it can be a dissatisfied customer. And that happens especially if gaming and betting, for example. If you have people who are betting on a website and they lose all day, well, they might use the last 20 euro to invest into a botnet and to attack your platform and to try to gain some satisfaction by bringing you down. So, and those goals mostly damage reputation. And then you have the hacktivists who are not there for the money, but more for the ideology, and they want to make a point. So they will come to your website and they will try to disrupt it, especially when you have a website that has a specific political topic or subject that it's demonstrating. So they're after disrupting that and just proving a point. Defacement is another one of their activities. Now, another one that comes up quite often, but is not always visible, is competitors, and they do it to get a competitive advantage, not only in DDoS technologies, but also in everything that's automated threats or the bad bots, as we call them, scraping prices to undercut your prices, but also trying to impact your reputation. So doing a DDoS attack like on Black Friday can have a really big impact on your website. It's much easier to move from one shop to the next in the digital world than it is in the physical world. So if people come to your website, they try to log in, it's impossible to log in. Well, they quickly will search on Google, where can I buy the same thing? And they go to another website and will buy it over there. So, and it happens quite often, actually, but it doesn't make a lot of press. But I have a nice example on that later on. And then you have the, yeah, I call them script kiddies here, but it's not, I would call them the individuals. They're mostly driven by eFame. They start out as script kiddies because script kiddies use pre-built tools that they download. They just run the script without actually knowing what it does, but they evolve and they get better and they get more experience, and then they become part of that organized crime. So they might be building their own tools, they might get experience and perform bigger attacks. And but they start out with gaming, so for excitement and fun, showing off what they can do. There is some money involved sometimes, so they will do some crypto mining. We see them trying to get some money out of it. But typically when they move to the organized crime, that's where the bigger and more driven by money that we see them go into the objectives. And then the last one, nation states. So, and these are driven by geopolitics. And we see DDoS attacks, for example, used in the combination of cyber and physical warfare, where it creates chaos. Whenever there's a DDoS attack, especially on critical infrastructure, then you can create a lot of chaos, and that can help in physical warfare. It can also have an economic impact. We saw attacks on exchanges that caused economic impact for countries, and also stealing. And especially, we all know North Korea that has infiltrated several banks and also got into the SWIFT network, stole millions out of there, but also targeting crypto exchanges. So they're not afraid to go out and to steal money. And it's especially North Korea because yeah, that's basically their way of funding whatever program they have. Now, the favorite attack tool for most of the DDoS attackers has always been the botnet. And I know people heard a lot about botnets, but it's not always clear when we talk about botnet what it is. So a botnet is consists of a central, what we call a command and control infrastructure. So that's a bunch of servers that are running somewhere in the cloud and easy to get access. You have virtual private servers in the cloud. We also have what we call bulletproof providers. That means those other providers that when we are sending an abuse, so when we see that there's a command and control server that does something bad, we want to take it down. Typically, we will send an email to the cloud provider and say, hey, that server is being abused and is performing attacks on people outside of your network. And then typically they will investigate and they will take it down. Bulletproof service providers don't do that. Bulletproof service providers are typically in Iceland or in other countries like Isle of Man, and they are in those legal setting that they don't actually have to do anything. So they just don't care about abuse messages. That means that their server stays there for longer. So though that infrastructure, typically that central infrastructure will go scan the internet and try to find what we call bots, which are the parts of the army. So the command and control is the general, the bots are the members of the army. And the bots nowadays typically are IoT devices. And with IoT devices, I mean everything that is connected to the internet. Most favorite devices are, of course, those that are not protected by a firewall. Those who have free access to the internet and who are exposed directly to the internet, because those are the easy victims. And for most of those, it's IP cameras, routers. So everything that we have in our home that has a port open to the internet, There must be a known vulnerability somewhere, and then they can abuse that vulnerability and they can infect it with the malware, and they will run a bot there. And that bot will be controlled by that central infrastructure. Now, the bot herder is the one who takes control and who maintains the botnet, and he can perform commands and perform attacks on a specific victim. So when you see an attack coming from thousands of different IP addresses, it could be from a botnet. Now, another part that he does is provide an API, and that API will allow a front end, a web interface, to interact with that botnet. And then you can have attackers that come in and through the web interface buy services, buy parts of the botnet, or buy just timeshares, and they can use that interface then to perform attacks on any victim they choose. So examples of that are Mirai, which was the first one that was discovered and was published in large scale, going after IoT devices. But then you also had others, and we see that more and more IoT botnets are also moving to cloud servers, so trying to infect cloud services and leveraging cloud servers to perform the attacks. It doesn't have to be IoT devices exclusively. So how do they get to those tools? So when they are an attacker and they want to get access to botnet, well, you can bring your own, may mean you build yourself one, or you can contract it. And to build your own, well, it's pretty easy actually, because when you go onto YouTube and you type in build Mirai botnet, you will find lots of tutorials out there. It's described step by step. All the source code is in the public for Mirai. You have everything to build your own botnet and to perform DDoS attacks. And there's also lots of help in the hacking forums. That's typically where they start. They go into forum, they ask questions, they get around, and that's how they get into much larger trouble afterwards. There's also a lot of IoT vulnerability research to leverage. So if you search for IoT vulnerabilities, you will find a whole lot of researchers that published information how to attack. And then you go to GitHub, you will find lots of proof of concepts there that explain very easily with code examples how to infect and how to put or execute a malware onto an IoT device. And then there's also the ones who contract, and Fronton was the one from the GRU, so from the Russian nation affiliated group that put out a contract, actually like an RFP, to build a botnet. They explained like we want to have a botnet that's peer-to-peer connected and that does this and that does that. And then they put it out on the underground. So there's also the contracts out there that can be fulfilled. Now, another way to go is to buy a ready-to-go botnet. There's actors out there that are selling their own botnet. So they build their botnet, they gather some bots, and they have, for example, 1,000 bots, and they sell it for a certain price. Now, the prices are pretty low, and the reason behind that is because the botnet is not maintained. So you just buy it without support and without guarantee, which means that you have a 1,000 botnet today, but since there's lots of competition on that market, everybody's fighting for that share of IoT devices. So whenever an IoT device is rebooted, it loses his executable, or somebody can find a new vulnerability, comes in, and the first thing it does is kick out the other malware that's in there, and then you lose your device. So because of that fragmentation, we see lots of small DDoS botnets, but also you see that when you create a botnet and you buy one, it has 1,000 today, maybe in 1 month, it will be left over with maybe a couple of devices only. So that's why it's so cheap. And then you have rent a professional. So you can pay someone to do the attack. And that's, for example, Best Buy was one of those hackers that did the attack on MTS in Liberia. Sorry. So we will come back to that example afterwards. And then you have yet another way to perform attacks, and that's the easier way, and it's as a service. So as we know, any software as a service, DDoS also has his DDoS as a service. And these we also call booters and stressors. And you don't need to go to the underground or to the dark web to find booters and stressors. And if you type it in Google, you will find them. There's even Google Ads, and I will share a slide on that. It's amazing how easy it is to get access to stressor service. Now, you get full access, you get the full API to automate, you can perform any attack on any target. You could use it to test your own defenses, but I wouldn't advise you to do that. But I will come back to that in a second as I show you an example. Now, what were the marketplaces? And back in 2016, the landscape was different than it is today. It evolved seriously, and they matured along the way in the last couple of years. But it started out mostly on Jabber and other peer-to-peer communication tools. And here is an example of Best Buy selling his botnet for with 400,000 devices. So he's making promotion here for his Mirai botnet that consists of 400 devices, and you can rent it, and then you can use that tool to perform attacks. Another way to find them is through YouTube. So some of them are tutorials, but there's also a lot of people out there who are recording attacks and demonstration attacks that they're doing, and they show it off on YouTube. And then they give typically a Discord number where you can contact them, how to get access, and how you pay for their DDoS botnet to use it and leverage it for your gain. And the same on Twitter and Instagram. So it used to be that on Twitter we saw a lot of messages. It's happened less now, but it used to be that we saw a lot of messages from groups whenever they attacked a big target that was like a marketing campaign to them. And that's another motivation to attack a website. It's like, okay, look, I can bring down this big website with my botnet of that many thousand bots. If you want to rent it, you can contact me, and then they give you a Discord number or another channel to contact them. But now they move more and more to Instagram. So here is one of the guys who built the botnet and his seller. So they're also already splitting up. So as I said, they work in different groups. Everybody has its own specialty. Just like in the real economy, you have marketeers, you have the engineers, you have the R&D. They are all working together, and they try to get access to the best tools. Now here's an example or a screenshot of a booter service. So that's a booter or stressor service. And as you see, it's just a convenient web application. You just subscribe to it, and then you have access to a certain package, a certain level of DDoS attack. You select what method of attack you want to use, you put in the IP address, and you click start attack, and that's it. It will attack your target, and if all goes well, if all goes bad, your target will be down as you start that. Now, getting access to this, and that is a real problem, if you ask me. But when you type stressor or booter in Google, you will see Google ads. The top Google ads, so the first page of Google displays you DOS Ninja, Atom Stressor, and Stressor. Those are illegal stressor services. And I stress the fact that it's illegal. It's not a legal service that you can use, even if it is to test your own network. If you want to test your own network, there are people out there who are specialized in penetration testing. They will verify your identity, they will create a contract with you, they will make an NDA, and then you will perform the test in an organized way. This is not the case with booters and stressors. With booter and stressor, you make an anonymous account and you pay with Bitcoin, and then you will put an IP address and you will attack it. Now, prices are fairly low, and that's the concerning part of it. Now, even more concerning is that there's a free tier. So you can do a test with a free tier, and the free tier is limited in bandwidth in attack power. So as you can see, like the basic subscription for 30 days is like 10 US dollar. And then you can do an unlimited number of attacks, but each attack can only be 5 minutes, and you're limited to 15 gigabit per second. Now the free tier is 1.5 gigabit per second. And just by registering, you can do a 1.5 gigabit per second attack for 5 minutes on any target. And you can do it an unlimited number of times per day, which is already concerning because most of the enterprise, especially nowadays with the pandemic, people are working remotely. How many companies have a 1.5 gig coming into their enterprise for their VPNs? There's not that many. So, and when you see the first tier for 10 US dollar per month, you get 15 gigabit per second. That's already a lot. We are always talking about the very big attacks, but let's think about the reality. Some internet connections, some servers don't have 1 or 2 gigabit per second uplink. So a 1.5 or 10 gigabit per second attack is more than enough to bring them down. Now, of course, they also provide bigger attacks. So for the enterprise package and the premium packages, they can go up to more than 200 gigabit per second. Now that's more or less the landscape, how they get access to the tools, what tools can they use to perform DDoS attacks. And you see that the threshold is very low to get into the game. Once you set your mind to it, okay, I want to do an attack, I want to do something illegal, well, it's just a matter of Googling and you can do it. So how are they using those tools to get access to the money? And that was one thing that's still going on actually. It's DDoS extortion. So much like ransomware, where they come into your network, encrypt your data, with DDoS extortion, they will send you an email address. So at some point you receive an email, and it will have a subject like DDoS attack on, and then the name of your company. And then they will tell you we are, and then depending on who they are targeting, they will say we're either Fancy Bear, Lazarus. We also saw some from Armada Collective, but Fancy Bear and Lazarus are the two ones that are mostly used. And they're actually not Fancy Bear or Lazarus. They're just posing as that group. And why they do that is because Fancy Bear and Lazarus are two well-known groups. So Fancy Bear is the Russian APT, so it's Russian state-sponsored hacking group, and Lazarus is a North Korean one. And those come a lot in the press. Lazarus comes in the press. I already said it, attacking banks. So typically, when financial industry receives a letter, a ransom letter, it will head up with "We are Lazarus Group," so that people see, oh, finance, Lazarus, yeah, those guys are well known as attackers in the finance. And if it's another kind of customer, it will be Fancy Bear. So, but they pose just as them. It's not really them. Well, we cannot be sure 100%, but they use at least two groups. So we can be sure that it's not at least both of them. Now, they will say that your network will have a DDoS attack starting next week. To show that they are real, they will already have done a demo attack, or they will be performing a demo attack at the same day that they send the letter. And typically, the demo attack will be like 5 to 10 gigs. Well, depending on your network. If you have a limited network, it will be smaller than that. The idea is just to show that they are true, that it's not an email without an infrastructure behind it. So the demo attack is there to prove that. And if you don't pay, and they will put in a Bitcoin address, and that Bitcoin address is unique for every victim. And that is actually how they track if someone pays. So if the Bitcoin address contains Bitcoins by the end of the week, they will not attack you. If it doesn't, they will start a DDoS attack. Now, that DDoS attack, typically when they do a follow through, we've seen attacks between 200 and 300 gigabit per second, but it does not always happen. Sometimes they send out the email, do a demo attack, and then there's no follow through. Sometimes they send a follow up email telling you, hey, we see we still didn't pay. We are serious. Look at what else. And they give some examples from the press. And then they will try again to extort you, but still no attack coming. So some of them were not followed by attacks. Some of them were followed by actual attacks. And then, of course, when this goes on and this goes into the press, and people start to know about, oh, there's a big DDoS extortion campaign going on. It's aggressive. They're asking for 20 Bitcoin. Um, then, of course, you have the hoaxers that come into play, and then they start copying. So you have the copycats that copy the letter, copy the full campaign, send the email, but they don't have a DDoS infrastructure. They don't even do the demo attack. So it's like an ecosystem that starts to live. And you see, as more as the first group gains success, the second group will come in and try to profit from that success and scam based on that. It's like every scam and business email compromise methods that you have out there. Whenever they see a compelling event like vaccination or like pandemic information, they will abuse it, and they will try to use it to scam you into giving them money. Now, some public examples are OTP Bank and Magyar Telecom, and the attacks, especially on ISP, were mostly DNS related. So you see a lot of DNS attack traffic coming through, but also a lot of UDP fragments, SYN attack. So it's always a multi-vector attack, and that goes between 200 and 300 gigabit per second. Now, what we do advise customers to not pay. If you pay, you are funding their operation, and they can just continue. They increase their infrastructure, they get better, they get motivated. So they just continue their operation. And although it has been a long running operation, I have no knowledge of any customer who actually paid them. So the thing about DDoS is that I still have to see a DDoS attack that cannot be blocked. So most of the DDoS attacks, especially when we are prepared, if you receive an email, you are prepared. You know that something's coming up. You can tell us, you can tell NaWas, you can tell them, look, something's coming up, be prepared for it. We know their attack pattern, so we already can put up some specific policies to make sure that there's zero impact. But even if we don't know, detection nowadays is so fast, it's a couple of seconds, and then we can trigger mitigation, and typically the impact will be not felt by customers. Even for the most complex attacks are just the simpler attacks, but all put together in multiple vectors. And they have some tactics to avoid detection, and I will come back to that in a second. But most of the attacks, you should not be too scared about it if you have a good solution in place to protect against it. Now, there's also DDoS attacks in gaming, and these happened fairly recently. So in October of this year, we saw two examples. There, it's of course not only in October of this year. The earlier this year, Blizzard was also attacked, but this gives like the context why they get attacked and who's behind it. So in October, PUBG had an attack and caused lots of freezing and disconnection issues. So all the users that are trying to play, they try to connect, they are connected, they are playing, and suddenly the session freezes. So can you imagine you have somebody in your visor, you shoot, and then boom, the whole game freezes. And those were caused by DDoS attack. And that reason for that was that, or probably the reason for that was that PUBG doubled down on cheaters. So they banned like a total of more than 6 million accounts the month before. And because of that, cheaters came back with a vengeance. It's a very emotional, so everything in gaming is very emotional. Lots of the times it's not only teenagers, there's also young adults, of course, but teenagers and emotions. That's what I think about when I see DDoS attacks in gaming. And Blizzard, pretty much, yeah, not the same thing, but again, those emotions that come up. So Blizzard had announced an expansion for their World of Warcraft, which is called Shadowlands, and it was supposed to come out at the end of October. But October 1st, they made an announcement that they would postpone it. And there was so much disappointment, apparently, that some players took to DDoS attacks to show them, hey, um, we do not agree with that. So an example of competitors performing DDoS attacks, and here's a picture of Daniel K. He's also known as a hacker with the alias Best Buy, also Spider-Man. And he used, and he already came up in the presentation. Remember when I told you on Jabber, there's this advertisement for a 400,000 botnet, Mirai botnet? That was him. So Daniel K was behind that botnet. He had a botnet of 400,000 devices. And actually, he was also the one that was behind the attacks in November 2016 on Deutsche Telekom. So at some point, Deutsche Telekom had 900,000 of their modems disconnected from the internet. It was a failed attempt to acquire or to infect those modems with IoT malware and to put them in a botnet. He was behind that. So he was one of the first that started going after the modems uh, after Mirai first struck into dying DNS systems. So he already had 400,000. Imagine if he would have been successful in Deutsche Telekom, that would have been 1.3 million device botnet. But now with his 400,000, he still could do some damage. As we saw at some point in October of 2016, there was a press release that said, "Hey, Liberia is knocked offline by a big DDoS attack." And a couple of years later, so beginning of 2019, he was apprehended, and then there was the court proceedings. And out of the court proceedings, it came out why Liberia was actually disconnected from the internet. And the attack was not directed at Liberia. The attack was directed at Lone Star. Lone Star is one of the cellular providers in Liberia, and their biggest competitor is Cellcom. According to the court proceedings, Kay was approached by a Cellcom employee, and he was offered 10,000 per month, $10,000 per month, to use his skills to do as much as possible to destroy the reputation of Lone Star. So what he did is he did his DDoS attack, and his attack was so overwhelming that actually the uplinks into Liberia were saturated, and for some moments, Liberia got disconnected from the internet completely. Um, and he was actually apprehended in Heathrow, and he had $10,000 cash in bills of $100 in his pocket. So So you see that competitors can do it. Now, of course, Cellcom didn't know about this employee doing it. It was the own doing of the employee itself, but it does happen. Um, Competitors are doing it. Now, the Dyn attack, and I want to zoom in a little bit on a DNS attack because this in particular was very impacting. For those who remember, October 2016, first you had the attacks on Krebs and OVH, and then shortly after you had the Dyn attacks. And the Dyn attacks, for most people, they will remember because lots of services on the internet were down. Netflix, Twitter, lots of cloud services, they were all impacted. And why were they impacted? Not because they were attacked directly, but because the name resolving was down. So that means when you go to www.netflix.com, you would not be able to translate that name into an IP address, so you cannot access the service. So it's not always have to be the service directly that you attack, but you can attack one of the side systems, and in this case, the name resolution. So, and there's a very interesting attack, well, I would say interesting, yeah, a very nifty attack, where you have what we call the water torture attack. And what is happening if you have a botnet with lots of bots, those bots can perform DNS requests. Now, instead of doing real DNS requests, we're going to make fake DNS requests. So we're going to add to pizza.com or www.pizza.com, we're going to add a random part to it. And every bot will in the world will do that. If I have a couple of thousand bots, different ISPs, so I will send a query for an unknown host under the pizza.com domain to a recursive server at an ISP. ISP will say, hey, I don't have it in my cache. If I don't have it in my cache, I need to go to the authoritative server. So since it's a random request, it will never be in the cache. So it will always go up to the authoritative server. Now, the DNS is a hierarchical system and is built in such a way that caching should be used. Otherwise, the servers will never size to take all the internet requesting names at the same time. So when all those devices start to have random names, well, those DNS recursive servers start to send their request to the authoritative servers. They start to suffer. As they suffer, these don't get the answer in time. They will do retries. So the ISP DNS recursive servers we saw impacted for some time. So some ISPs were impacted because they were flooded with requests that they didn't expect. And then the authoritative name servers, those fell over. So Dyn actually fell over, which is pretty big company. Of course, you can do request limiting, but request limiting, if you have 90% bad requests and 10% good requests, if you do rate limiting or request limiting, yeah, there's still 90% bad, 10% good. So you're still not out of the blue. You need to be able to filter out the bad and just keep the good. And there's solutions for that. But at that time, there was no solution on the market. And that made it a very impactful attack. Another more simple attack is amplification attack. And an amplification attack is something that was used against GitHub to perform very big, large volumetric loads. So 1.3 terabit per second at the time towards GitHub. And what they used was a memcached server. So memcached is like something that should be sitting between a front-end website and a back-end database, something internal to cache requests to the database because it's a memory database, it's a memory cache, it's a it's what we call a key value store. So when you put in a key, you can put a big value next to that key, and whenever you ask the key, it will stream. And now comes the clue: in UDP, it will stream you the whole value. But it's UDP, and everybody who knows UDP a little bit, yeah, UDP means spoofable. So whenever there's an attacker and he sets like a small key with a very big value, and then he sends a request to that server, give me that key. The server will use the source IP of the UDP packet as the next destination for the response. Now, if the attacker spoofs the IP with the IP of the victim, well, he will ask that key and the server will stream the big value to the victim. And with that, they could get up to 52,000 times amplification. So that's a major attack that can be performed. Of course, easy to block because it's UDP port 11 to 11. So if you know that it comes from 11 to 11, you know where to block it. It's also a limited number of servers. It's not hundreds of thousands of devices across the world that will be performing an attack at the same time. It's just a limited set of servers. Most of the servers are now mitigated. Memcached was never supposed to be exposed on the internet, but if it never is supposed to be, it does happen. Now, it's not the biggest attack. In terms of biggest attack, 2.3 terabit per second announced by Amazon earlier this year. But then Google came a little bit in October of this year, and they came at, hey, in September 2017, we had already an attack of 2.5 terabit per second. And they say the way that this is growing, the more bandwidth people are getting, the larger attacks are becoming. Um, Now, to the point, large attacks, I'm not that concerned. Typically, they're not that complex in terms of identifying where the traffic comes from. They're typically using a couple of amplification protocols and a limited number of servers. Um, and you do see them. It's easy to detect them because they are impacting your network. What I'm much more afraid of is the low and slow and the application level attacks where they do the small attacks. You don't immediately feel them or see them, but they are impacting your CPU. So if you're in the cloud, you're paying for every CPU cycle. So if you have that low and slow attack going on for 1 month at a time, you might be paying too much, 20% too much of your bill that goes to DDoS if you cannot detect it. So the low and slows you cannot detect. And then there's also the resource constrainment ones where you can have, yeah, you don't need a big volume. You just need to fill up a table in memory, like a session table if you do SYN attacks. That's why SYN attacks are so popular. So you can make tumble over a firewall even before the server gets in trouble. Now, one of the techniques to avoid detection that they can use what we call carpet bombing, and that's something that came like October, November last year together with the SYN reflection attacks. And instead of targeting a specific IP address of a victim, they're going to take the whole subnet of the victim. So if you target one IP, it's easy to see in your detector tool, oh, this server has a big spike in requests. Now take all those requests and split them out over the whole subnet. The whole subnet is still routed to the same point on the internet. So it's the same pipe that gets saturated. But instead of going to one IP and seeing one spike, now you see this. If you zoom in, of course, you see some levels of activity, but it's spread out. It makes the detection much more difficult. So that was one of the techniques that they started using now to avoid detection, especially when you have detection with NetFlow or SNMP. And then I said nation state is also sometimes involved. And I took this case. It's not only China that is performing nation state attacks. We have seen other attacks used in physical warfare as well, the traditional DDoS attacks. But this one is interesting because it uses a different kind of technique. And you all know about the Great Firewall of China, the firewall that's there mainly for censoring the traffic that goes out of China or the access from people inside China to the outside world. But they also every great firewall comes with a great cannon, and that's a lesser known part. And that great cannon was actually deployed back in December of last year to attack a website, an online forum, when the Hong Kong residents were organizing for the anti-Beijing protests. So what it does is whenever somebody is surfing to a website inside China, it would take the returning traffic and it would inject a JavaScript, just the same way that MageCard does for virtual credit card skimming, but this one is a DDoS. So what it does is you get a JavaScript in the client's browser, and that client's browser will now start to do GET requests to a website they want to attack. So they're just using everybody's browser around the world. So they make a botnet out of JavaScripts running in people's browsers at home to perform a DDoS attack on a specific target. And that target can be located inside China, but also outside China. So that's an example of how they use a great cannon. It's pretty creative in terms of building a botnet, leveraging the browsers of all the people. So that was an overview of what the threats are. And I'm happy to hand it over to Octavia now to explain a little bit of what they can do to help us prevent those attacks.
Wow, yeah. Thanks, Pascal. It was impressive what you showed us. And I'm always glad to hear that we're always talking about how can you mitigate about this. And we as a NaWas never talk about the sources or where it's coming from because it's a bit out of our span of control. So it's always very interesting what you showed us. I just want to invite everybody to put your questions in the chat. We will, we already shared that we will share the slides, Pascal's and mine. And also, while I'm going on with my presentation, just for the sake of time, I'll invite you to put your questions in, and we'll monitor them and see which the most interesting, which we can still manage to answer in time. And otherwise, we will send you feedback on that through email. So yeah, well, it's impressive. And at one point, I think, wow, what must you think, you know, when you hear all this? But there is, I'm going to start and end with good news, because as Pascal said, you can be prepared. Let me see. I'll have to go and share my own screen, Pascal. Yeah, let me see.
Yeah, that looks good.
This looks good. Yeah, this was my last slide, guys. So I'm already done. I just started to go the first one. Just start all things at the beginning. I'm sorry. Yeah. NaWas, it's a very nice name if you speak into the in Dutch, which is called Nationale Wasstraat, and it actually means the National Washing Street, actually the car wash. Which is very funny because it's talking about actually scrubbing the bad traffic and delivering the good traffic back to where it's supposed to be. We are a non-for-profit foundation, which makes us unique because we came to be out of this idea, and I think that started in 2014 when the first big wave of attacks on the banks in the Netherlands came to be. And then everybody got, like, you know, a wake-up call, thinking, oh well, this must be this is becoming a real serious problem. What if us as providers would ever be targeted, and how can we respond to that from knowing the fact that if you have to invest in knowledge and in infrastructure or software trying to stop an attack, it's a very costly business, and you have to always be prepared and always be up to date in what you're doing. This is how it came, this shared idea of what if we're all in this together, why don't we solve it together? That's how the NaWas came to be in 2014. And in doing detection, mitigation, and reporting, transparent reporting in the DDoS attacks on the provider's infrastructure. And we are these numbers are from 2018 already, but by that time we were protecting about 43% of all the .nl domains which were registered in the Netherlands. By that time, we never do the extra. We never thought, well, it could be like some .com, some other domains. We just did a research on the .nl domains, which is quite impressive. And why does it work so well? I'll show you just a little bit. This is the technical stuff, which is really easy to, I think, to understand. What we're doing is once we're using BGP announcements, we're scrubbing the traffic and delivering them back through clean VPNs, through clean ports back to where it's supposed to be. This is how it looks a little bit on a schematic level from how we get the traffic and how we distribute it further. If you guys want more inside technical info, I'll be able to provide that to you later on or in the coming days. We have several tier 1 transit providers who are connected to a lot of exchanges. We have multiple vendors into the scrubbing center, and we're deploying like that from the big to the smaller. That means we're filtering on the distributed on a distributed system, and we're getting the traffic through the mitigation machines and software until it's clean, and we're all doing that without any latency. We're delivering back through a clean port to the customers. What we're doing is we're always trying to improve, develop, and increase in what we're doing. We are actually, I was triggered by what Pascal said. Of course, what we're seeing, where we're fighting against our distributed attacks. That means that we mitigate it on a distributed level. That's what our development is going to. That means that we started off with connections in Amsterdam and AMA6 in Analytics, and we've been developing our network into UK, into Italy, Eastern Europe through Netix, and we're planning into delivering and extending our POPs into different internet exchanges. Because of this idea of distributed, we have to mitigate it, to do distributed mitigation, because we're talking about distributed attacks. Another thing, what I think it's really what triggered is what Pascal said is he talked about DDoS as a service, which is of course very an advanced way of buying something in, and you just use it as you need it. Well, that's exactly what NaWas is doing with our services, but we're saying we're doing mitigation as a service, because we are a standby service. You all connect us when you need it. You pay per month when you need us, and then we are there when on an as a service basis, as Pascal also was talking about DDoS as a service. It's very interesting to see, because we are a not-for-profit foundation. We are very passionate about sharing the knowledge we are seeing through all this time, and through the data we're seeing. That's why I was so enthusiastic about you guys from Radware, who are also willing to share your knowledge, because we're passionate believers that sharing this knowledge will all make us smarter and make us stronger together. Because eventually it looks like a war, but I'm really firmly convinced that the good guys are winning this one for a change. So what I've put into this slide just some ideas about what is happening, what have we been seeing, because we got some questions beforehand, like, did you guys see an increase of attacks during this pandemic, because everybody was getting home and being online? And well, unfortunately we did, which it is just to add on to what Pascal was already saying. Once everybody is out there, is online, and the connectivity is growing, so are the attacks. I have to confess to you guys, but when I came to work for the NaWas, that was in 2017, I was thinking, well, these DDoS attacks, guys, they might be like old-fashioned way of, of disrupting services. Well, was I ever wrong? Because there is nothing more and more into the news and more of the actual hot items than DDoS. And why? Because it's the most easy way to disrupt any kind of services. And also because continuity services, it's the business we're all in. Being online is just a given for everybody, all the time, everywhere. That means that with an attack, you can disrupt that. And what we're also seen is that it's a lot being connected to a business model. You can earn money by doing one of these attacks. I did some of these slides. You can download full reports from our site, so I won't stop a lot of this on these slides. The only thing I just wanted to show and to add and confirm what Pascal was saying is that targeting the DNS infrastructure is one of the things going on at this moment. We have seen that in August, the end of August, beginning of September. And it was a big thing at the end of 2016. And we thought, oh, wow, we've had that, yes. But it's coming back with a vengeance, because we see here like big attacks on DNS and ISP infrastructures. Which brought us to conclusions. We really have to do something about that. You know, we are developing in capacity, but also in being smarter. Like the example of the DNS water torture, which Pascal gave. That's really something we can't automate until now. We're working hard on that. We're working hard together with Radware on really understanding what is happening there. But one of the things we've also seen, and I'll come back to the next slides on that, is DNS infrastructures all out there have also to be updated. You guys take care of your infrastructure, you know, which starts with which is again the good side of the good news is you can do something about being prepared in case of a DDoS attack. And the question is not, am I ever being targeted? Because the answer is you will always get a DDoS attack. Why? Because either you are the target, you are an ISP or a provider or a bank or whatever, or you will be collateral damage in one of the attacks going on all the time in the infrastructures around us. So what I added here on this slide is what can I do, just to empower you guys, because you can do something about it. First is like what I say with basic hygiene, like keep your systems up to date. You know, the memcache was possible because now those weren't supposed to be out there. So take care of your infrastructure. Don't try not to be part of one of those botnets going on. Take care of detection, be able to detect what's happening in your network, and get a solution, mitigation solutions which feeds you, which is really good for your own needs. What we see, we are an as a service solution, which is a primary solution for a lot of providers of small, mid-size, or bigger providers out there. But we also have members of the NaWas who have a solution on premise, who have a lot of intelligence on their own infrastructure, who have their own mitigation solutions into their own infrastructure, and they use the NaWas, for example, as a fallback. You know, they do a lot on their own, but once a certain threshold is reached, then they switch over to the NaWas, and we're taking from there. They're saying there is always a solution for a DDoS attack. I'm really glad you said that, Pascal, because we're firmly believers that that is possible. It's possible to protect yourself and to not be, maybe you will get a disruption, maybe you'll be disrupted for a longer time than you will want to, but there is a solution for you. We say we never saw a DDoS attack which we couldn't mitigate, eventually. What can you do if you're under attack? You will get downtime, that's for sure, but call for help. You know, don't stay there and sit it out, because there is always help available. What we say is never pay, because then you're keeping up the business models, and you don't get any guarantees that they will stop anyway. Report to the police for as far as you can. I have to give a shout out to the police in the Netherlands. They are working hard on building a team high-tech crime, or dealing with especially these kind of problems and with DDoS attacks. We are working closely with them as a MBIP to provide them with information on that side. So it is worth doing that, especially if you get a DDoS extortion mail, because that is that's an illegal fight, and they like that. They can go after that. And what can you do? What are we doing more than that? And this is another thing which I'm really enthusiastic about, and it is share that knowledge as much as possible. We have another big, another wave of attacks which had made the prime time on the television in the Netherlands was in beginning of 2018, when the banks were down and some government sites were down, and a lot of things weren't working because of DDoS attacks. That was one of those moments when, again, a lot of the providers and a lot of solution providers in this area came together and said, well, we have to do something about it. Let's upgrade our game in doing this, because we're all in this together. That's how it came to be, to the Anti-DDoS Coalition, which has a great name of No More DDoS. We came together in beginning of in May of 2018 and said, well, can we share more about what we're doing? Can we get clever and more clever together? It's an impressive list of parties which are sitting at that round table. And the police is there, the government, the providers, the exchanges, the universities who are doing R&D on this side. And the good news about it is that this started in 2018, and it's more than only talking with each other. It's more than only sometimes crying on each other's shoulder and saying, well, this was a big one. Well, what we did, we had a very ambitious program in saying, well, we can share the knowledge on this level. We're sitting at this round table, we share the knowledge. Well, what if we could develop an actually technical clearinghouse proposition in which we actually share the patterns recognition of this of these attacks, and by that we will be able to detect them very easily and mitigate them easily, because we are all on different sides of the spectrum of this. But if we share this knowledge on a technical level, we will all benefit out of it. Well, and that's been going on for 1.5 years now. We are actually making steps into actually setting up this database, which is the DDoS Dissector database. And we're very pleased in the way that everybody is actively working in towards having this come to be. And I think it will be on a European level a unique initiative in trying to get this technical clearinghouse done. And and they actually even started to get some attention even from our parliament in the Tweede Kamer. They asked this big question like, can we ever, like get rid of all the attacks forever? No, we can't. But we are really stronger together by the fact that we're sharing this knowledge, and we are actively working towards getting more clever in what we're doing. And this was my good news part of the story for this afternoon. I really wonder if you guys have some questions for us, or for Pascal, or for me. I haven't followed the chat, so I'm waiting for someone to give me a hint on that.
Yeah, I saw a couple of questions coming by. So I tried to go to the top because there was one question that was asked about the somebody who has authoritative name servers for DNS, and they have seen those random subdomain attacks, and they ask if NaWas has experience, and you already answered part of that. And I can also say we have algorithms who are able to protect against those attacks. And there's an easy way to, well, an easier way to block them, and that's by sitting between the DNS server and the attacker, and you can look at the response from the DNS server, and then you can see when there's an error. You can always list that on a blacklist and say this name is incorrect. Now those systems will fail. What does work, however, is during normal time. So what we have typically in our devices, we have an under attack threshold and we have a peacetime working condition. So when DNS is working in peacetime, what we do is we record all the queries coming in. And if we see queries coming in 3 times, so 2 or 3 times, we add that name to a list of well-known domain names. Now, when we see that the number of requests goes up and we see a lot of diversity in the requests, what we will do then is put it into attack mode. And in attack mode, we will not add new entries to that list anymore. That means that if the entry was not on the list of well-known good names, we will block it. And by doing so, of course, we don't have the integration with the backend. You can also manually put the names into a blacklist or, oh, I cannot say blacklist, sorry. So you can put the names into a whitelist or a dark list. So if you do so, well, you can do that manually, but it doesn't scale, especially when you're a provider. And in terms of NaWas, if you have asymmetric traffic coming in, so you have the request coming in through the cloud, through the detection mechanism, but then going back out through another way, you don't see bidirectional traffic. So you cannot record errors, you cannot make sure that the entry was in the server. So the way that we do it is peacetime, we track the good names. We use a Bloom filter for that, which is statistically the best way to track that. And whenever we see the diversity going up for a certain domain, we will go into attack mode and then we will only whitelist the ones that were known during peace mode and block all the others. So there is attack mechanism. The only problem is when you go to a level of NaWas, you have so many service providers in the back end, you need to scale it. And as I as we said, we still have to see a DDoS attack that we cannot mitigate. But what we did not say is that for every mitigation, there's a cost. And to mitigate an attack that is 3 terabit per second, we need a 3 terabit per second aggregated bandwidth. So if we have enough aggregated bandwidth to block it, yes, we can block it without problems. However, if you only invest in 100 gig per second, well, you will not be able to mitigate that kind of attack. So yes, we can mitigate any attack. We still need to see that level of complexity that we cannot mitigate it, but there's always an economic struggle. And that is the thing in security. That's most of the time the objective of security. You cannot secure yourself completely. You have to secure yourself in such a way that you take the economy out of the hack. If it's not worth for the attacker to attack you, he will move on and he will take the next victim, which might be your neighbor or which might be your competitor. So always think about when investing, think about how do I take that economy out of the attack? How do I make them pay enough that it doesn't come profitable to them anymore?
Yeah. Yes, there are two questions, general questions about why are DDoS booters or stressor, if they are legal, why are they tracked down and brought to justice? Well, that's very interesting one, because first of all, because it's really hard to know which are the actual physical persons behind that. Am I right, Pascal?
That's correct.
Also, the bit of bad news about that is there have been I think it was in 2018 or 19, there was a big action, there was some big actions going on, and going in and knocking on doors, and the Interpol was busy with that, and and arresting people who are actually doing this. The bad side of the bad news side of that kind of story is that eventually the result on the actual DDoS attacks which we see is quite low, because it's like like a few booters are down for 2 weeks and then everybody's going, it's back in business, which I think, if you see how much effort it takes to actually go after those people and get them brought them to justice, and what the result is on the other hand of the increasing of the DDoS attacks, there is no business case into that, but that's the reality. And the other question is about other countries with similar organizations. None that I know of. That's why we're actually expanding into Europe, because we are really passionate about this way of working together into fighting this kind of attacks. Yeah.
Yeah, coming back to the booter and stressor service, one small remark to everyone. If you consider using that or you consider go looking in there, never use your own email, never use your own IP, always use tunneling. And think about this. Some of those booters and stressors could be run by the Dutch police or by the FBI or the CIA, you know? It's a good honeypot. If you want to track who wants to attack who, what I would do is just put up a service, a front end, and let people register and let them perform attacks. And that way I can track attacks. So whatever you do on the internet, it's never what it seems to be. So always be cautious of that and be careful of that, okay?
Do you see more interesting questions? I think there are. I don't see them all. Do you have more in? Do you see more in the chat, Pascal? Which we could.
Yeah, there's a lot coming by in the chat. I see that people are helping each other answer the questions,
Wow, that's good.
which is great. Yeah, I see all
Yeah.
the links of the Dutch police bringing down. So coming back to your comment about Dutch police, who was involved and who brought down all those stressors and 15 or more or 18 or
Yeah.
more booter and stressor services. Well, it creates a void, but that void is quickly filled up again.
Yes.
People
Yeah.
know there's profit to make, so
Yeah.
you just make room for the next competitor, and they come back bigger and better. You know, it's always difficult, and we have a report on the DDoS for hire threat landscape, and we see that's actually increasing. So after that, there was like a small dip, but it
Yeah.
quickly got filled up, and it actually comes back with a revenge. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it is growing, and if there's money involved, as long as we cannot take the economy out of it, there's no way of fighting it. There will always find a way, and it's not always easy to bring them down because, as I said, you have those bulletproof providers. If they are
Yeah.
in Iceland, if they are in Gibraltar, if they are on Isle of Man, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
There's no way that you can fall into their data center and take out the server. You cannot do that. Yes, the Dutch police can find the bunker in Netherlands and take out the bunker, and yeah, you take out lots of illegal sites. But those bulletproof providers are in other countries that we cannot get to, and we cannot
Yeah.
take them out. There's no regulation to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really great to see that there is a lot of going on in the chat as well, and people are helping each other getting the right answers. Where really, I think we could stay in chat for the rest of the afternoon, isn't it, Pascal? I want to thank you again for your great contribution to this afternoon. I had a really great time. Thank you again for all the good work also from Radwa, which you guys are doing. We're really getting every time more clever about the technique and more enthusiastic about the technique you guys are providing. And well, thank you everybody who did attend. And we will keep you up to date. We will send you the slides and the recording of this session if you want to keep up with it. And well, hope to see you online anytime. And otherwise, yeah, keep safe. And till next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye bye.